Well, this is a great day already. I get to pronounce Tom Sarig and welcome him to the podcast.
Oh,
Look back,
God.
Tom. How are you from Midtown New York today?
I'm doing very well, Keith. How are you?
Gosh, great to talk with you. I'm doing well. First of all, I didn't even know you were my idol before we talked a little while back, but um, Lou Reed, Roxy Music, the Violin
Yeah.
Band. I mean, just like go down the list of my favorite bands from back in the day.
Are those your favorite bands,
You
really?
got you got to meet and work with them all.
Yeah, I managed Lou Reed for the last 10 years of his life, about 10, 11 years of his life.
Well, not necessarily his best years for sure, but
They
the guy
were
was
great,
a
though,
poet.
actually. I will say that he's a guy. One great thing I can say about him, amongst other things, that he was an artist who really lived life to the fullest and pushed himself till the very end. He worked harder than most other young artists that I've worked with. And he was managing when when I had my period of 10 years building my own management company, working with older artists like a Brian Ferry or Lou Reed or Violent Femmes or Ricky Lee Jones or things like that. Those artists teach you how to be a better manager, a more strategic manager, have better instincts with creative things. For the young acts, it made me a much better manager for the younger acts.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. I think that's a great point. We won't dive too much into the historical stuff because I could go into those topics for quite a while, and I'm sure you.
You don't want to hear any like weird stories or any like late night
Oh
sort
my
of,
God. Oh my God. You, Andy Warhol and Lou sitting
I
around.
could write a book, but I won't.
Well, how about we just do this podcast? I think it's so phenomenal to grab you in this time because I've dove into a whole bunch of areas of topics of how AI is this tidal wave tsunami effect on the whole economy and digital transformation, but we haven't really dug into my favorite business, the music industry. I spent some time in and I love what's happening in the world, but I want somebody to give me a level set with digital
AI,
streaming kind of taking over? Is Spotify the new king of music? What's going on
sure.
with Apple? What segments are hot? Tom, give me a macro zoom in on what's going on in the business right now.
Well, certainly streaming has become most of the business. I think it's 75 or 80% of the recorded music revenue. And, what's left of physical formats is like 10 to 15%. So streaming has really taken over. Streaming, I think Spotify and Apple launched in North America, Western Europe around 2011, and it took a few years to catch on. People were kind of didn't know whether to trust paying $10 a month and not actually owning anything. I have 2,000 pieces of vinyl at home just collecting dust, right?
Right.
And someone convinces you to pay $10 a month for access to all the music in the world, but you don't actually own any of it. That's a big kind of leap of consciousness in a way for some people. So streaming, especially for sort of older crowds, streaming was a little slower to catch on. But by 2000, I'd say sort of 15, 16, 17, the streaming subscriber numbers, especially like in the what we call the first world, North America, Western Europe,
Right.
Japan, Australia, were exploding really. And I was, yeah, I've been an A&R executive for many years before that, so I'm always watching what new records are coming out, and I was suddenly seeing a lot of acts on Spotify that were, on Spotify you can sort of follow the number of streams. They publish the number of streams right on the platform, and I was noticing many artists getting tens of millions of streams, which I'd never even heard of, which that never had never happened before to me. So I knew this was a really exploding business, and that a new sort of class of artists was being created. Back even before sort of 10 years ago, I think that most of the routes to success were either you were lucky enough to make enough noise that you got signed to a major label, and hopefully the major label put a lot of effort and money, et cetera, behind you, like a Warner
Yeah.
Brothers or Sony or Universal. Or you sort of toiled in obscurity, locally or regionally or otherwise, right? There wasn't that much in between. Of course, that's a vast oversimplification, but the streaming era has created this sort of like middle class of artists. I think Spotify published that in 2023 over 9,500 artists made over $100,000 just on Spotify just in 2023. So that should give you an indication of like how there are a lot of tens of thousands of artists. That's just on Spotify, but there are tens of thousands of artists who are earning in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, essentially making a living through music sales, which they were never able to do as a small independent act. They had to rely on touring and touring and touring. And now an artist can really have a real income from, I wouldn't say they can get super rich, but they can have a very serious income that can pay for their lifestyle such that they don't have to wait tables at night or, or work in some office during the day or that sort of thing.
That's what I was going to ask you too, because I think there's a general perception, and I don't know if this is was based in anything close to reality, but that there was a 90-10 kind of law, like 90% of the artists on Spotify, iTunes are not making money. It's a wasteland, and only the top 10%, or even really the 1% of the 10% are those that are making money. Do the artists feel like Spotify has become a more equitable platform than what we've had in place before?
Well, there's always going to be artists at the sort of the lower end of things that are going to complain that something's wrong with the system. And the Spotify and the whole streaming ecosystem is by no means perfect, right? It's by no means is it like completely
Right.
equitable all the time. That being said, more artists are making money and are able to make a living through streaming than were ever able to make a living through record sales. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Some artists are complaining that Spotify or Apple or Amazon don't pay enough royalties per stream, right? Which those are the artists that are not getting in the millions of streams, but you have to kind of separate the two concepts. Selling an album in the days of selling albums, whether you went up to Tower Records or whatever your favorite record store and bought a CD or a piece of vinyl, the relationship between the consumer, when you bought the record, and the record label, which I used to work at, started and ended with the person buying the record. They paid their $12.99 or $15.99 for the CD. I think that was the height of the price, and that was all the money that the record label was ever going to make from the consumer. Now, music is really the gift that keeps giving, which is a positive for artists who have real fan bases because over the lifetime of a fan, going back to their favorite music over and over and over again, the labels and the artists will make a lot more money because the streaming will amount to a lot more than just the one-time purchase of a CD or vinyl. So it's much better for a lot of artists. But there's always going to be artists that's sort of at the bottom of the food chain who are going to complain. But those are artists who wouldn't have had a chance in the past, I don't think, mostly,
So it sounds like things have evened out a little bit, though, in terms of we went from, the digital industry went to Napster, and that model was
Yeah.
not sustainable. And then people were complaining early on about Spotify, Apple taking advantage of the artist to a certain extent. It feels like maybe that's been more balanced.
It's definitely been more balanced, and in general, I think the music content, music selling, and streaming ecosystem has become much more equitable for the entire community than it was back in the days of selling vinyl and CDs.
I love
You
it.
the major labels used to control sort of the end cap, they call it, which is like the place in the store at Tower Records where you get to see right when you walk in, you get to see the records. So there was a lot of things that kind of swayed people one way or another. And the accounting from record labels was not always clear with physical units. I
Yeah.
think it's much more fair, much more linear and clear now with digital music because every song every recording has its own what's called an ISRC code, which is sort of like a social security number for recording.
Right.
And that can be tracked throughout, streams and wherever a song goes, whether
Right.
it's licensed to something outside of Spotify and Apple, like a Peloton or a meditation app or something like that. You can really track streams in a way that's much more efficient than the old days when records used to fall off trucks, you know what I mean? And then you didn't get paid. Those were the old days.
The old, yeah, from the moonshine days.
Yeah, the record business used to be a trucking business, literally.
Yeah.
You know?
Wow, Tom, fun stuff. So That takes me forward to another segment of the market that's really exciting. There's been a lot of purchases made of, these artists and their libraries, right? Some huge names selling and buying and making tons of money in this area. I know AntiFragile Music, your company, is getting hotly involved in library purchasing.
Yeah, so I've had sort of several different periods of my career. I started off my first decade in the business, I worked in A&R for several different major labels. And then my second decade in the business, I started a management company. That's when I managed some of the acts that you mentioned.
Right.
And then around 2017 and 18, when I was noticing these acts, like I mentioned, getting a lot of streams on Spotify and Apple and whatnot, I decided to take some of the money that I'd saved from my management company and I started a record label. That was AntiFragile. We did really well sort of right out of the box. I think we'd done like $1 million in streaming income within a year. And that was the cue to me to like get out of management. I love artist management, but artist management entails literally flying around every week, going to Europe. I think I went to Europe like every other week for 11 years,
My
and
God.
that was really tough on my family.
Yeah.
And so it's exhausting. And also with artist management, there is uncertainty. Like you mentioned, Lou Reed died while I was managing him, or certain artists break up when they reach their peak. So you can't control the income. So I was looking for kind of something else to do, and I had started my career as an A&R executive. I was always my talent I always felt was finding artists when they were sort of young and helping them develop into something much bigger and better and helping sort of be a shepherd for them and helping steer their career into where they wanted to go and realizing their best potential. And so I in 2017, mid 2017, beginning of 2018, I started Anti-Fragile and I started signing artists mostly to smaller like license deals and it was easy because you don't have to pay for manufacturing records so much anymore. I mean, we make vinyl for a bunch of acts who sell them on the road, but the selling of physical units in record stores for young developing acts is kind of over, especially in America where vinyl is now returnable. If the record store won't actually order the vinyl unless they're 100% sure they're going to sell it because they have to keep it. Yeah. The major labels instituted that
Yeah.
plan
Okay.
during the midst of the low period, right? And so it's very hard. The record stores that are left are filled often with either the most popular artists' vinyl, like Taylor Swift may have a vinyl, or James Brown and Marvin Gaye reissues or things like that. There's not a lot of developing artists in the few remaining record stores that are around. So it's mostly a streaming business, and we do make vinyl, limited amounts, 1,000 or 2,000 for artists when they go on the road to tour, because vinyl has sort of become a keepsake. How fans support their favorite artists by buying vinyl at shows. But So I started Anti-Fragile in 2018. I started doing deals with artists and license deals, and almost immediately it went really well. I've always had a staff of sort of between 6 and 10 people, depending on how busy we were. And so my management company staff kind of morphed into a marketing staff for a label and a publishing company too. We also were very involved with music publishing, and so we just started doing our thing. I hired a publicist at the time. I hired a radio person at the time. I don't have a publicist or a radio person anymore because those people, those industries don't mean much anymore.
Yeah.
The discovery, that's another thing that's really changed really in the last like 10 years or so. When I was coming up in the industry, well, when I was coming up, MTV was really king, right? And a lot of artists were discovered or broken, as they say, through radio, through television, and through the media, through press, right? I think I used to subscribe to 35 music magazines, and I was just a music nut as a kid, right?
Yeah.
And as a professional as well. But those things, though they still exist, they're kind of meaningless. There's not enough people listening to the radio anymore,
Yeah.
terrestrial radio.
It's sad it's sad for me to hear all this because I'm a former DJ, college DJ, and
Same,
music
same with
guy.
me. Same with me. I
I
love
ran
radio.
oh man, I used to
And I,
read
and I still,
back.
I have a Sonos in my apartment, and I listen to Sirius XM a lot, and I love radio, and I love hearing new music that I don't know on radio. But at some point, radio is terrestrial radio has always been, Keith,
Yeah.
an advertising business, not a music business, right? So once their ad dollars started to suffer, stations like K Rock in Los Angeles, which was this great station that kind
My
of
gosh, of course.
established The Cure and Depeche
Jed the
Mode.
Fish. Shout out.
Exactly, Jed the Fish. So that station, which was the number one alternative station in America for like 35 years, they've had to revert to playing a lot of what they call classic alternative. So like old stuff like Nirvana and Soundgarden and The Cure and
Yeah.
things, which are great records, but that takes the place of a new artist spot.
Yeah.
So those radio stations are not breaking artists anymore.
Right. Right.
And it's partially also because the attention span is not with radio or press or television
Well,
anymore.
it's interesting. I was going to hit you with this question too, because remember the old saying, "Video killed the radio star." That
Right.
famous song and MTV launched it.
Social media killed them all.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to say. Well, now isn't it TikTok and Instagram that are the tastemakers and
Absolutely, like I believe that like 95% plus of music discovery for people of all ages is on either Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, or YouTube, right?
YouTube? Yeah, of course.
It's one of those. It's where, I go home a lot of times, and, at my age, I don't even watch TV that much. I go through my YouTube scroll to see
Yeah,
like what
yeah,
things that I follow and that I'm interested in may
yeah.
have like some short form programming. And I think that's what TV is becoming more and more. I even think
I'm
that the
definitely
net,
discovering more music on social media than I am listening to the radio. I want to dig into Antifragile though. What is the opportunity that you saw that said this could really be a big business that'll take me away from all these other successful things that I was doing?
well, I saw that with when I started 8 years ago, I signed a bunch of different acts, and they were musically they were really all over the place, from singer-songwriters to pop music to kind of alternative rock to hip hop oriented soul music, things like that. Because my tastes are very eclectic, and I never wanted to be just in one kind of music.
Yeah,
And my team was really good at PR and working social media, helping artists work their social media. We do a lot of social media advertising, so we'll make little clips, 15-second clips, 30-second clips, which nowadays you can use AI. We'll talk about AI in a bit, but I
yeah.
think AI is a huge plus for our business, not a minus. And so we make tools that we use as marketing tools, little clips that we put on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and especially Instagram and TikTok, but also Facebook and YouTube ads as well. We spend a lot of money with those companies trying to get our cool, quick, short content in front of other similar but bigger artists platforms. So if we have like a great sort of like gal singer songwriter who we think is wonderful, starting to do well, we might create a clip and put it, pay the advertising dollars to put it on Instagram near a Taylor Swift clip or something like that, or on YouTube or that sort of thing. And we have advertising expert. I have a couple advertising experts here who do that week to week, and that's how music discovery happens. But in a way, it's really like a great linear way of seeing. You can actually see how the ads are working and how they're translating, how they're converting to streams directly. In the old days, you would put up a billboard on the highway and you had no clue of how that billboard was helping sell your product or not. There was actually no way to quantify that, right? And even you could even argue a television commercial. How
Yeah.
do you really quantify how much that's adding in sales to your product? But with social media ads, you really can. And that's where the attention span. And so I saw that there was a big business. I saw that there was a big business developing in something that I love, which my calling has always been, like I said, developing younger artists into great, mature, fabulous artists that are changing the world and moving culture. And I've never worked with just kind of like any old bobblehead that was going to be a hit. I always wanted to work with, and have continued to work with, whether it's the veteran artists or the younger artists. I've always worked with artists that I thought were culturally significant and kind of had the chance to change the world, so to speak.
Okay.
And that's really, I found that when I've kind of worked and chased those kind of artists, that some people might think those kind of artists are less commercial, but I actually think there's more commerciality in artists that have really something to really say, and you can, go by the example of like a Bob Dylan or Kurt Cobain or whatever it is, who that might not immediately be apparent, might not immediately apparent that they're commercial, but their music is so great it kind of rises above everything.
So is the model then for you to find that one hit artist and then the rest, everything will kind of even out? Or is it
Mine
more?
hasn't been that. Yeah,
Yeah.
mine has been like we had several different artists that did really, really well. Like we have marketing budgets for every record. I signed a lot of music over the last 8 years, and we bought some artists out and then we sold later to other people and had a really great return on investment. So I began to see that there was an opportunity in sort of the middle market, as I call it. The business of music IP, music intellectual property, that's been a very hot investment space for the last, I don't know, 5 years or so. The story of Hypnosis is very popular and them going under and all that. And there's all these great big companies out there, Primary Wave and Round Hill, Concord, et cetera, that are mostly bidding on the household name big star artists, right? The big catalogs, including the major labels like Sony Music, I think bought Queen's catalog for $500 million or something like that.
Right.
They bought Bruce Springsteen's catalog. And those other companies that I mentioned, Harbor View is another one. They're buying mostly sort of well-known artists, stars, artists with big catalogs. The problem is, and this has been in particular problem for this one company, Hypnosis, that's quite well documented, that have just sort of either gone under or kind of morphed into another company because I think part of the problem may have been that they overpaid for a lot of the music that they got involved with. They paid multiples that were very, very high, like as I've heard, sort of 25x
Wow.
yearly earnings, which
Yeah.
is for any business you look at. If you're going to buy a photography business or a burger business or a music business, paying 25 to 30 times yearly earnings, you're gonna have to really do well to make that money back and make that a profitable business. And
Yeah.
so I think because of the competitiveness of it, and because of the sexiness of trying to corner the market of I have this big star, I
Yeah.
have that big star, there's been a lot of crazy bidding going on. Whereas I saw, just because of my record label, the patterns of artists that I've been signing and having success with, there are artists that are sort of in the middle. The example that I gave before of Spotify publishing the factoid that over 9,500 artists made over $100,000 on Spotify, just in 2023. There are tens of thousands of artists who are making somewhere between $100,000 and $1 million a year.
Mhm.
And those artists a lot of those artists are great artists that are on their way up and getting better, and their catalogs are worth a lot as well. And I think those artist catalogs can be bought by for much lower multiples because the artists are still in their development stages. They're not huge yet, and it actually is doing a great service for the artist. Artists at this level, say you have a band from Boston and they're making $500,000 a year between streaming and touring and all that. That sounds like a lot of money, right? But after they pay their manager and their lawyer and their accountant and they split it 4 ways between the band members and they pay their taxes, they're not rich, right? They're wealthy enough such that they don't have to wait tables at night anymore, like they would have had to in the 80s, 70s or
Yeah.
80s, or 90s, right? But they are at a point where they are not exactly rich, and they're kind of, to use a baseball analogy, I say they're kind of stuck on first base. They're doing really well, but they're kind of stuck on first base. They don't have a label, they're independent. And without that extra push they need two things really. They need money to get to that next level, to tour internationally, to be able to afford a bigger record producer, to do things like to afford like a possible guest star. That's one of the things we sometimes do as a marketing play and as a creative play on some records is we'll pay for a bigger guest star to appear on one of our developing artist records.
Very cool.
So these artists need more money in a
Yeah.
big way in order to get to that next level. And the other thing that they need that they don't have, because a lot of these artists, remember, are completely independent. They usually have a manager, but besides that, they've never had a label. They've never had any kind of label marketing infrastructure. So what we do is we buy into their catalog, but we pay them a bunch of money, not 25x, but more like,
Is it a one-time purchase or is it a relationship, like on a recurring revenue basis?
It's a one-time purchase of the catalog, but it can, the hope is that it becomes a real relationship for a while because a lot of the artists that I've worked with in my time, I've had sort of lifelong relationships with,
Good.
you know.
Yeah.
If I love an artist's music, I'm a fan forever, and I want whether I'm working with that artist or not, I wish them to do well, you know.
Gotcha.
When I started AntiFragile, we were doing really simple one album deals because I didn't want to hold artists down for too long. No one knew where streaming was going, and so some artists did really well with us and then went on to another label after us because
Right.
they didn't owe us any more records and ended up doing much worse with a
Yeah.
bigger label than they did with us. And so, you know, but I wish them well. And I wish those artists well, no matter what. And I try to choose artists that I think are really special and unique and have something to say for the world. But so the deal is that we look to find these artists that are fantastic, that have been around for a few years, that we think are on their way up, that have a big future.
Yeah.
Yet they have some catalog that's out. They have a few albums that have been out already, some records that have been out sort of 3 or 4 years. We buy into their catalog, we pay them a certain big sum of money, which will enable them to do these things that they don't have the ability to do right now. And a lot of the times we will also give the artist like a passive participation in once we buy their catalog, we'll give them 10 or 20% so they can participate in the upside. Because usually when we acquire a record and start working on it, we can add revenue because we do things.
You'll put them into the social media,
Exactly, exactly. We
hurricane.
pitch for syncs, and you know what syncs are, like music and film, television and video games. We do the social media stuff. We do all that stuff, and so we give them marketing infrastructure, which helps not just their catalog, but helps
Okay.
propel hopefully their current records as well.
We've talked a lot about how the relationship works with the artist. How does this relate to being a great business for like somebody who is thinking about getting into the music industry?
Well, it's all, you know, it's just like the stock market. It's buy low, sell high, kind of, right?
Yeah.
You know, I don't mean to state it that crudely because it's not. We're if it was as simple, it's much harder than stock market because we're dealing with humans and we're dealing with art, right? And that's a very subjective
True.
thing. And
Yeah.
so, you know, every artist I sign is me placing a bet on an artist that I think is wonderful, talented, and can have more success today than they've had yesterday, and more success tomorrow than they've had today.
So is the secret sauce the economics that you've discovered, the your listening ear to identify the right artist, or the marketing muscle that you have behind that artist to help them hit that next level of downloads?
That's a great question. I think it's truly a tricky sort of mix of both, and it's got to be both. It can't just be if this was just sort of
Oh,
looking at the numbers and finding artists that had the numbers to invest in, we'd make a lot of mistakes. And I think there are certain investors in music out there that have been driven by accountants, and I am actually a former accountant, but but I'm a music person
yeah.
first and foremost. I've been a music nut and an A&R executive for many years. So we look for artists that fit the investment thesis first. They have to make the numbers work, and then we drill down. Like if I'm looking at 20 different artists that might fit the investment thesis, we then have to do things like drill down into their social media and look at their relationship with their fans. We have to interview the artists. We have to talk with them repeatedly, whether on Zoom or in person. Go see them live.
So it's
There's a
funny,
lot.
instead of the billboard charts, you're looking at TikTok and Instagram and
Oh
seeing
yeah, for sure.
whose user counts. What are you looking at? What are the key
But
metrics in that world?
we're looking at views of posts, at engagement, at
Yeah,
growth, you know, of all those things.
makes sense.
And I think artists that, you know, it's rough for artists these days because they have to be really good at developing some sort of relationship with their fan base. I used to say that artists used to have only to worry about two things in their career, the two tent poles. The first tent pole was like recording, you know, all the thought and process that goes into writing songs and picking a producer in a
Yeah.
studio and all that sort of stuff. So recording, and then the second tentpole was live performance, so touring and finding an agent and all that sort of where are we going to tour, who's going to be our opening act, all that kind of stuff. There's now a third tentpole in the last sort of 6+ years, which is social media. An artist has a responsibility, especially new artists that have been grandfathered in, artists that are 10 years or more older than that can get away with not being great at social media, but artists that have come along in the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years, they have to have a talent and an acumen for building an engagement and a relationship and an ability to entertain over social media, or they're going to be
Yeah.
left or they're
It's
going to be left
funny.
behind.
We could go on a whole bunch of rants here. I mean, I remember going to see Miles Davis back in the day, and he played with his back to the audience the whole time. He didn't give a shit who was there.
I
But it
know.
was an amazing show that blew my mind. And just like,
Totally. I mean, when I
even
managed Lou Reed, he would play concerts. He wouldn't play one of his hits. And I was like,
people
why
went
don't you?
nuts.
People are coming to hear
Yeah.
certain songs. Eventually, he did.
Yeah.
When he got older, but he at first, artists are. That's why artists are great. They're very sort of. They make music for themselves, which is wonderful.
Today, could you imagine not saying, I'm not going to do any video, I'm not going to do any social as an artist? How do they? I don't know. Maybe
I
they,
know.
yeah, that would be a
Yeah,
different.
a young Miles Davis today, that genre even like they have to do social media. They have to be good at it.
You would have to lead with that before your
You're
music.
exactly right. You're exactly
I
right.
hate to say that. It'll almost like
Yeah. Yeah, you have to
critical to say
build.
that.
You have to
What?
start with that. That's how you sort of seed your fan bases by leaking out little bits and bobs of songs and videos. And the good thing is that there's all these tools today that make it easy and cheap, which leads me to like the AI thing. You can take a piece of your music and there's umpteen different, text prompt to video tools out there, AI tools out there where you can make music video clips for next to nothing.
Right.
There was a time when years ago when I worked at Arista Records, we had to make a Whitney Houston video for $1 million before we even started the campaign. That was part of the game. You had to have some grand thing that we're going to give to MTV and blah blah. And nowadays, bless you, nowadays you don't have that expense. You can do so much more with so much less.
That's fascinating. So let's talk about the genres too that are changing and the whole explosion. We got to mention things like American Idol and The Voice,
Yes.
how that's infused the music industry and how these genres are shifting and changing, right? We grew up in a day where it was you were jazz, country, pop, metal. Now it seems like everything's sort of blending together. What's going on in terms of those artist categories and the impact on some of these TV artists as well?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of cross-pollination, but I think that was always there. I think most people's taste, like I like all kinds of music. I love metal, I love hip hop, I love country.
Same.
And I look after great personalities and great songs. Like I don't know if you saw the Woody Allen film Broadway Danny Rose,
Yeah.
but he says I look for songs and stars. That's all. That's all it's about. Which there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
So that's my lowest common denominator is I look for really great songwriting, really interesting personalities, and that can exist in every genre. And now I think most people really have eclectic taste. Most people have tastes like me, like they like a lot of different genres of music. They just like good music in different genres. And I think that was never serviced in the past. And now you see a lot more cross-pollination of that. And I think that's a real positive thing in music that's happening.
Yeah, I like it too. You've even got me to like some country music of late and a little
And
bit.
also the flattening of the world with like I don't love, to be honest, much K-pop. A lot of it is a bit brainless to me.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's happening, I think, is a positive thing. The fact that the music world is really a flat world now, that there are kids or adults in
No, I
either.
love you mentioned that. I love you mentioned that. It's true. What about American Idol and The Voice, which everyone loves to hate, but sometimes watches it, or like
Yeah.
you do such a great job producing those shows. It's insane.
I think now those shows have matured to the point where they're always great TV, right? But they're not really developing hit artists much anymore, any of them,
Yeah.
In other countries, I think The Voice is licensed to like 30 different countries or something. It's on in like Uzbekistan, but
Wow.
it's really like it's very much I think a lot of those shows are not really producing really great art. It's hard to break through that, you know.
Yeah.
It's a weird sort of, it's
That's a
a
good point you made with the distinction. It's great TV, and they do a great job with the video
oh yeah,
backgrounds and
it's
story.
very entertaining just to see who's going to win in the
And how
competition.
many of them break through into really selling units and moving volume?
In the first few years of American Idol, you had like Kelly Clarkson and what's her name, the country singer,
Yeah.
blonde one, you know, and there was a bunch of artists that did break through, but it's been a while since like I could be wrong, but I think it's been a while since any major ones have broken
Yeah.
through.
Well, they
This
do covers too. They don't really write their own stuff.
year.
So how extendable is that? Anyway,
Yeah,
let's get back to AntiFragile because I know I'm taking too much of your time, Tom. What
it's fine.
hey, huh?
It's fine. Happy to talk
Oh,
to you,
no,
Keith.
I'm enjoying this conversation. We can go into so many other pockets. But
What kind of music are you into?
so it's funny. I was thinking as you were talking about the last stuff that I've discovered has been through the social channels, and
Yeah.
I have this
You're not
list
a
of
Bay
stuff.
Area music guy, Journey and Metallica.
Yeah, I have all that stuff, and we go
Yeah.
to the local festivals out here. You know, our Outside Lands is still one
I
of my
love Outside Lands. Yeah.
because it's so cross-cultural. It's so,
Oh yeah. It's one of
multiple.
the great American festivals. Yeah.
Yeah, we really have a great time. And then, we love bottle rock too, which is a little bit more
Yeah.
subdued, but not always.
You know, they should they don't have that much music at the wineries. I feel like they should. Well, I went to Australia with
Mm.
Violent Femmes once, and some of the wineries there have literally have like stadiums built for the winery,
I so agree with
amphitheaters.
you. I brought this up separately. They even have great venues with stages.
Right,
Like,
right.
yeah,
They would have real artists come to play those and
yeah,
play those for a lot of money because a lot of those are like adults with money that won't mind paying a little
yeah.
extra to see an artist. The wineries could be much more sort of
But we
useful.
do have the mountain winery here, but that's quite a diversion.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
that's its own thing, I
that's
think.
a
Yeah.
classic venue. So we've got great venues. I
I
have,
mean, all up and down the coast, San Luis Obispo and all, you
right.
know,
Well,
Willamette Valley in Oregon and all that sort of stuff, you know.
yeah. No, I got to come out to see some more music, some more new music as opposed to the old stuff that I go see. But anyways, I love what you're doing. It sounds fantastic.
It's fun because I feel like I'm using my skill set of developing or finding artists that I think are really special and
Yeah,
have a real future
yeah,
and are making great music and haven't made their best music yet. And I'm helping them develop and get to the next level in an industry now where there's not a lot of like direction laid out for artists all the time. It's kind of like you have to sort of find your own path and a lot and you know people need all the mentorship and all the help they can get. There's precious little of that, I think, in the music industry now. So if I can invest in an artist to enable them to further their career, give them some marketing help to enable them to get more people to discover them, I've done a good thing in the world and made some money along the way.
yeah.
You know,
Money aside, what is your sort of goal for the next 6, 12, 24 months?
to sign, you know, 10 to 15 more artists to Anti-Fragile in terms of catalogs and record deals in general. And just to keep doing what I'm doing. You know, my lucky lot in life is that I've got to work as a talent finder and talent developer in music for like 27 years now. I've really been blessed
Yeah.
and been able to make a really good living at it at the same time. So I feel like I've really been blessed.
What a great story. I like where things are headed now again in the music industry.
You
Artists
do?
artists are happy. There's good stuff coming out. And
I think so.
yeah,
There's also always great music when there's kind of political turbulence in the world, and I think now is a particular. I wish there were even more acts that were kind of speaking politically, but I think right now is a really good time for. There's always good culture when there's a lot of turmoil, whether it's economic or social turmoil, and I think it makes for good culture usually, you know.
I agree 100%. I'll be listening, I'll be watching, and thanks for sharing all this great
Thank
stories
you.
with us.
My pleasure. Anytime, Keith.
It's been great.
Take care.